in my mind, the reason why the shields add to the world is now you have like a science fiction setting in which you have to do a heck ton of knife fighting, right? Like that's like, I mean, how do you get past the fact that like you've got all this advanced tech and you've got all these spaceships, but really what you also want is Sardaukar soldiers fighting, the Atreides in like hand-to-hand combat with like machetes, right? So like the shields are the way to kind of create that as a world-building necessity.
Welcome, friends, to episode 204 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week we discuss Denis Villeneuve's 2021 film, Dune, Part 1.
So here to sandwalk with us this week, we'd like to welcome the award-winning author of the sci-fi novels Exo, Zero Boxer, and Crossfire, as well as the Greenbone saga, an epic fantasy trilogy whose final installment is releasing very soon. Welcome back to the show, Fonda Lee.
Thanks for having me back on, guys.
So nothing has changed since we last had you on. I don't think anything has been... Everything's been fine. How are you?
I'm good. Released a few books along the way, making it through a pandemic. What to be expected.
Jade War, I think, was not out when you came on last time. I think just Jade City was out. And now you've got Jade Legacy. I think I saw the release date, the official release date is November 30th. Is that holding? Is that true?
Knock on wood. I'm watching, the news about supply chain disruptions with a little bit of anxiety, but hopefully everything goes smoothly and the book comes out on time.
Yeah, and that's the final installment in this trilogy. Very exciting. And speaking of exciting, I saw you tweet about this. I think it was the first I saw it. And Deadline announced that Jade City has been starting to be put into production for an adaptation on Peacock, which is like NBC's streaming service. That's so exciting. Like one of our former guests is now having an adaptation made. I had to bring it up. What's the status with that? Anything you can share?
Yeah, so it is in development with NBC Universal for Peacock, and I'm getting a bit of a front row seat into the adaptation process, if you will. And well, there's one thing I can say for sure, it's that there are a whole lot of hoops to jump through in the adaptation process. Many hoops, everything from getting writer on board and having the initial outline approved, and then having a pilot script written and having that approved. And so right now there has been a pilot script written, and there's currently a second episode being written, and fingers crossed that we keep jumping through those hoops. And it's certainly an interesting process as the creator of the novels to see how things get changed and adapted, and all the sort of different considerations that go into developing something for screen. Because there's things that I can do as an author that I mean, as a novelist, I have complete control over the world, and it's pretty much just myself that I have to please during the writing process. While as in Hollywood, there's so many other considerations, everything from budget, and who the executives are that are going to be potentially greenlighting this, and what other projects are being developed there, and just so many things. So who knows, maybe one day I'll get to come back and talk about the adaptation process in more depth.
Oh, I'd love that, because we're going to cover it, when it comes out. Like, I can't wait for that. You have also written some Marvel comics since last time you were on, which I know James is a big Marvel fan. I mean, I like the movies and stuff, but he is actually a comics reader. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that. Very cool.
Yeah, I did a short run of a Shang-Chi series. So it was just a 6-episode run of Shang-Chi, which was fun to work on because, of course, of the movie coming out. So it was my first time working on a established franchise, and playing in someone else's sandbox, so to speak. That was very different from writing novels, because comics, as you can imagine, is like such a fast turnaround. Like, you write the script and then it goes to production, the art comes in, and then, you know, the lettering, and then it's like published in 6 weeks. Unlike my fantasy novels, which is like takes 2 years to write and then another year to come out, and yeah, it's a very different process.
I mean, that's awesome. I mean, Shang-Chi is now like, I mean, he was well known, but now he's like household name around the world because of this movie that came out, and it was super massive, and it was a really fun movie too.
That was awesome, yeah. And that was one of the things getting me back into the theater recently. And speaking of getting back into the theater, we're here at Dune, which is something that we've been anticipating since Blade Runner 2049, and we covered, that was like our third project for this, or maybe second project, right? Second.
Do Androids Dream was our second project, yeah.
So we've known this is coming for such a long time, because it was announced fairly soon after that.
I think so, yeah.
I want to ask Fonda, what's your history with this material, with Dune, the novel, and then maybe talk a little bit about your theater going experience?
Yeah, so I have been looking forward to this movie for so long. I think you guys actually asked guests, it was like over a year ago, like, what movie you're looking forward to, and this was like in the, was it 2019?
It was our 100th episode celebration, and we just hit our 200th episode recently, and the movie still hadn't come out.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it'd been delayed a lot.
That was for the 100th episode. You asked what movie you're looking forward to, and I said Dune. And so it's been a while. But I would definitely say, you know, there are a few books that I consider foundational texts as a writer. Not necessarily my favorite books of all time, but the ones that were the most influential on me. One of them is The Godfather, which I came onto the show to talk to you guys about way back when Ink to Film was a baby podcast. And
we're a toddler now.
Yeah. But Dune is definitely another one. I would say as much, if not more so, than Lord of the Rings. And I didn't read it when I was young. I read it, but I did read it early on in my writing career. So really when I was just starting to get serious about writing for publication, taking like writing as a thing that I wanted to do professionally, I read Dune, and it really had a major impact on me. I think for a number of reasons. Like, I think of Dune as science fiction for epic fantasy fans. And it was really a novel that taught me that you don't have to use medieval Europe analog to tell an epic fantasy-esque story. And before Dune, I had read quite a bit of science fiction. I had read Asimov and Bradbury and, you know, Philip K. Dick. And a lot of those science fiction stories that I'd read were very idea-driven. And Dune was one of those novels that was not at all skimpy on the ideas, right? There's so much in there about like ecology and economics and religion, but it also had this clash of noble houses level of drama, and also knife fights and sandworms and vivid world building. So it really kind of spanned this range between epic fantasy themes of prophecy and magic and noble house politics, all the way to hard science fiction. So just like the scope of Dune in terms of spanning kind of the continuum of speculative fiction was something that really had an impact on me personally, and it influenced the way that I think about writing, because I would later on go to write this epic fantasy trilogy that's set in a modern era secondary world with like Asian culture influences, and it kind of really cemented for me that you could do all these amazing things across the spectrum of science fiction and fantasy and blend them together and put them in a different world. And it was just really innovative. And, you know, now reading it I read it years ago, but before I went in and watched the movie this weekend, I went back and just sort of refreshed. And, there are things that like structurally and stylistically, like reading a novel that was written in 1965, like now, are like that bug me in terms of like discarded characters or like how choppy the ending was, so there's still things that I'm like, okay, that sort of trip me up a little bit, but like on the whole, it held up remarkably well, and it's just still such a fundamentally important book to me.
I completely agree. We talked about the book over 3 episodes, and we had some similar observations. I think for me, it is the world building on display in this book is incredible and one of the best I've ever encountered, and that just lines up perfectly with why I wanted to have you on to talk about this. I think a couple days ago, your episode on writing excuses, another podcast, just came out. And it's one that I listen to quite frequently. And they had you on to talk about world building. And they said you're one of the masters of world building in fiction right now. And I completely agree. And I think that totally lines up and why I think you're a good person to have on to talk about Dune, because a lot of people, especially when it comes to science fiction, when they think about great world building, they'd probably reach to Dune. So I'd just love to hear you talk a little bit more about the ways in which Frank Herbert is able to craft this world, and then the ways that the story sort of organically comes out of it. It feels like, because we talked about his story seed was these dunes in Oregon that he went to, and he was on this assignment, and he was learning all this science and stuff about the dunes themselves, and that was his story seed for this entire book. On that episode of Writing Excuses, you mentioned you had a similar sort of world-first approach to Jade City.
Yeah, definitely. And, the thing that is really impressive about Dune is that he takes everything in the story works with the world, right? Like the fact that it is this desert planet influences everything about the culture of the Fremen and their customs and the way they live. And, it undercuts all these themes of colonialism, right? The fact that this desert planet is the only source of spice. And it could be made into a paradise, but intergalactic capitalism being what it is. It's not. It's being mined for this resource. And so there's just so many great plot elements that spring from the world. And I went into the movie completely cold. I did not want to read anything about it or look at any reviews.
That's hard, because I know you're on Twitter and it's hard to avoid takes.
It is hard. It's very hard to avoid, but I was just diligent about it. I didn't want to have anything kind of mess with my initial impression with it. And I was so excited when I remember hearing Denis Villeneuve was going to be creating the film, because I was such a big fan of his aesthetic style with Blade Runner 2049 and Arrival and Sicario, which are all films that I just love. Like he is, in my opinion, has such a distinctive filmmaking vision that I went in with really high expectations of what he could do with a world like Dune.
I heard some rumblings of people sort of feeling like it wasn't going to be able to live up to the expectations of what Dune is, and this, epic novel, like you've talked about, so foundational. And I'm like sitting here thinking, like, it's Denis Villeneuve. Like, who could we possibly be in the hands of besides him to take us on this journey? And like, we saw what he did with an existing material with Blade Runner, and like how he bridged that gap and made it was wholly its own. Knowing that he was such a big fan of the book, I knew he was going to do it justice, and I am very happy that they decided to do it in 2 parts, which is like a whole thing. Because it's only half of a story, I think some people may walk out having thought that it was not necessarily what they were expecting, but that's the best part, is that like it wasn't what you were expecting, but it was a unbelievable experience in the theater. And that brings me back to theater. So did you guys see it in IMAX? Like, what was it like? Because for myself, it was like religious experience. Like it was like my body was being shaken. I was getting chills and stuff. Like, how was it for you?
I did not get to see it in IMAX. I saw it on a big screen, but having seen it now, I want to go back and see it again in IMAX. That was the one thing that that I kind of regret, like not booking ahead of time, was like the IMAX ticket. But I'll get back in there. Make sure I see it on an even bigger screen, because it was amazing. I am glad that he is the sort of director who has the clout in Hollywood, given his track record, to demand that it be done in 2 parts and not be crushed down into, a 2-hour film, because I don't think that would have done justice to it all.
I listened to an interview. It was the Director's Cut podcast. It's like the Directors Guild of America does a podcast, and it was Christopher Nolan interviewing Denis Villeneuve about Dune. And Denis mentioned that because Blade Runner 2049 wasn't the smash box office success that maybe the studio thought it might have been, he felt that was why he wanted to shoot Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2 back to back. He wasn't able to because the studio felt it would be too expensive, and all of these other variables came into play. But he's now saying that it's kind of a blessing, because, a lot of things happened during the production, like COVID just popped up, and the movie was supposed to come out sooner than it did for us. And now it's interesting because of where we leave the story. I think it's a good opportunity to sort of, without spoiling anything, set up something that happens in the book.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that hours ago, part 2 was greenlit, literally like 4 hours ago. This will come out on a Thursday, so it'll have been two days and 4 hours ago. But it's very exciting that we're like on the cutting edge. I'm really happy that we're recording after the announcement, because this would have sounded a lot more dated if it had come out on Thursday and we were like, who knows if it'll be part 2.
Yeah. So for me, I did get to see it in IMAX. It was fantastic. I went early on a Sunday in hopes that it wouldn't be super crowded. It was like packed to the rafters. It was so full in there. It's a massive theater. I was amazed at how many people were at the showing, and I was like, well, I hope that means this movie's doing well. And it sounds like it is doing pretty well. If they're greenlighting part 2, I assume it's because they're getting money.
While we're here for real quick, because you set me up for it, opening weekend in America, $41 million in ticket sales. With it opening on HBO Max at the exact same time, people could stream it at home, which takes it to around 220 million global currently. And projections are saying it's probably going to cross 300 million, and that's sort of the threshold for making its money back. So that's probably why it's
on its way
being greenlit today, because the results are in and audiences like the movie, and I think they want more.
I wonder how they calculate in HBO Max numbers and stuff, because that seems very tricky.
Yeah. There's so much to get into with this. Should we jump into it now? Denis was against it. Let's put it that way.
And also, I did read that Part 2 was greenlit with the stipulation that it would have a exclusive theatrical release.
Yeah, and I heard that's what the negotiations were going on. That's why it took a little while for this announcement to come along, because normally it seems like it's doing well overseas. People were like, why haven't they greenlit a Part 2? I think what Fonda's saying is the reason. It's because they were negotiating the fact that Denis was like, no fucking HBO Max, okay? He's like, just theatrical.
Right.
Yeah. Well, speaking of HBO Max, I actually did get to watch it a second time yesterday, because I wanted to be able to pause and take notes, and it was actually really nice. Did not sound nearly as good. It looked pretty good. I have a pretty good TV, but my sound system is shit. So it's a very different experience. But I was able to turn on subtitles and catch all the stuff that I missed. I was very happy about that. Definitely recommend it, even though I feel like I paid my dues and now I'm allowed to watch it on HBO Max.
Yeah, I did the same. I just wanted to get the double dip. It's a different experience at home. I highly recommend anybody who's listening, go see it in the biggest theater possible. I'm not joking. The sound design of this film is life-changing. There are certain things that you haven't heard before in a film.
Yeah.
And visually it's just amazing. We'll talk some more about cinematography and all that.
I did want to just weigh in a little bit on Denis Villeneuve, because we both love him on this podcast. And I know, Fonda, it sounds like you're a big fan as well. And I don't, that's not to say he's not without his detractors. Every now and then you do find people who didn't like the look of Blade Runner. They don't like the look of this and that. And there's some people who don't like the look of this movie. Believe it or not, I've seen those people on Twitter. So I know that there is dissenting opinions. But I think that to me, that makes me like him more, because he's got such a strong artistic vision. that it's not going to appeal to everyone, right? Like, he's got this aesthetic that he's clearly going for in this movie, and not everyone's going to love it, but for those of us who do love it, it is just like transported. I absolutely adore the way this movie looks. And, you know, I like the idea of an artist who isn't necessarily for everyone, but is totally for me. So that's how I feel about it.
And I love it too. I feel like his style aesthetically is very spare and haunting.
Yeah.
And it, like, I come out of every single one of his movies and I just feel like I've been transported, you know, and in there's this sort of starkness to his aesthetics that I think some of his detractors don't like because they feel like it's technically astounding, but has this sort of emotional distance to it. And there's a sense of, you know, of maybe coldness almost. I don't agree, but I can kind of see where they're coming from. I happen to love it because there's almost like a documentary feel to it, like a sense of scale. And he doesn't force emotion either. Like, he doesn't play up the deaths that happen in his films. He doesn't like kind of try to draw out the emotion with like melodrama or with sound. Like, he just kind of lets them happen. And you will feel like you're witnessing something on an immense scale that has this almost muted melancholy to it. And so I come out of every one of his films just like with this almost numb, but like in a good way.
Yeah. You know, as far as it feeling almost like a little surgical or removed, like you were saying, in a movie like Arrival, I can see it a little more, but in this one, and I know this isn't your opinion, but anyone who was saying that, I wholeheartedly disagree. I felt like I felt like there was emotion. So it was so intimate the way he was shooting some of the characters at times, and it felt grounded and human and like in this epic fantasy story that takes place on other worlds and in a desert. It's like there were times that it was so intimate, and there's no VO, but it's like we kind of are getting the internal thoughts of the characters through the shot selection that's happening when we're close up on a character, especially in like some of the vision scenes or anything like that. But the score as well, I think, like lends itself to that. I feel like we're getting the emotion of the story through the characters in a way that I wasn't even maybe expecting in such a large scale story like this. I thought it was maybe going to be more like an Arrival where it feels otherworldly and removed.
I will say one thing that that Villeneuve does a lot is shots of people against this vast landscape. I feel like that is something that he does in every single one of his films, where you almost get this sense of like of smallness, because there's like these figures and he'll just kind of pull back and let you sit with the wide shot. And then he contrasts that with, like you said, James, like very close up, like intimate moments. He just has this confidence in his vision where I feel like he knows exactly what he's doing.
Yeah.
At every moment.
I feel so safe going into a Denis Villeneuve film. Like, I just know, like, I was willing to, even last week as we were ending the episode, I was like, I'm ready to see this masterpiece. And it's because like whether the story hits perfectly, whether everything was executed well, I know that it's one of the most confident and like visionary directors out there right now. And just from like a production standpoint, this is world class on every level: production design, set design, editing, sound design. Like, everything is the top that you could ask for. And you know, if nothing else, even if you walk out and you're like, that movie offended me in every way, you can see the artistry in like the craft of what they're doing is on every single frame.
And he knows how to linger on a beautiful shot. And I think that's something that I really look for in a confident filmmaker, when there's not necessarily anything super plot relevant happening, but he's willing to say like, actually, this shot is amazing, and we're just going to linger on it for a second, just to like give you the feel. And yeah, sure. And every second of this movie is millions of dollars, right? Like, it's very finely cut, but he's still lingering at times, and I love that because it shows off all that beautiful work that's been done on this film, like you said. So yeah, I mean, we're in the general thought section here. I think it's pretty clear we all were taken with the visuals and the sort of aesthetic experience of watching it. Without getting into any plot spoilers for people who maybe haven't seen the movie, what were your thoughts just overall on the story of the movie and the way that was executed?
I was really impressed and actually a little bit surprised by how faithful it was to the novel. And I think this goes back to what James was saying. Like, clearly he's a fan of the book, and he very much wanted to bring the book to life and didn't do a lot of changes to the text other than like kind of what was necessary in order to, you know, make it fit its runtime as it were. But it was like going back and reading the book and then watching the film, like it tracks very closely. In
all the research that I did, I found some fascinating things that Denis Villeneuve has stated, and it goes directly to what you're saying, Fonda. He said, quote, "We're not here to express ourselves, but here to represent the book and Herbert's words." So like in these interviews and everything that I was reading, he said as much. Like there's the David Lynch film. Hans Zimmer, interestingly enough, had never seen that and was like, I don't want it to influence me. One day if I end up scoring a Dune film, I want to have like my own idea of what I want to do. So that was interesting. But yeah, Denis actually first read this story when he was 13. And he and a friend went through the process of storyboarding it on their own, even back then.
Wow.
And Denis was saying that he was attempting to go back to those uncorrupted images that he was coming up with and dreams that he's had of it, and like trying to storyboard in that way, in like sort of like the primal first reaction version of his 13-year-old idea of Dune. And like he's doing what he set out to do, which was please anyone who's read the book. And I think if you've read the book, if you haven't, I understand maybe having some qualms here and there, and it's not, you know, you may be lost along the way at some points, but if you've read the book, I think you can appreciate like how much effort he's putting into it.
I think tonally, thematically, like just the mood, like everything to me actually lines up with the book. Like it all felt novel accurate. Just the sense of epicness and danger, just sort of the politicking, like all of that had the same texture as it did in the book, for the vast majority. And I think for some people who are maybe major book fans, there's always going to be a possibility that, because we're leaning on Villeneuve's vision that he came up with when he was 13, right? Like, and then obviously modified over time, but like everybody who reads a book has a different experience, because like half of what you get in a book kind of comes from your own mind. So of course, some people have very strong feelings about how things should look and be, and sometimes it won't line up. So there's always room for that. But I mean, this is just like, it's just about as good as you can get. Storyline for me, I completely agree with everything you said. Like, I think that, you know, the characters are so well performed. This cast is incredible. Just unbelievable cast. And, so exciting. There's just so many things to praise about the plot and story of this movie. My only minor criticism that I'll put out there, and I'll maybe defend it more later when we can get into spoilers, is that I felt like the pacing suffers a little bit in the like final third-ish of the movie, maybe the final just little bit of the movie. And we can talk about why I felt that way. But it's okay, because like ultimately this is a part one. And so it's always going to feel a little off when you don't kind of get the full story. And I think that might be a bit of a remnant of that. And some people might judge it harshly because they're kind of considering just as a standalone film, when really it's not intended to be.
You mentioned cast, so I do think we have to talk about the cast now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a story that I want to tell. As we were walking out of the theater, my girlfriend left to go to the restroom, and she came back and reported that she heard a group of girls gushing over Oscar Isaac. And I've heard everyone since on social media, everywhere, everybody's losing it about how attractive he is, how amazing he is. And I the only reason I'm surprised by that is that, like, yeah, that's been the case for years. Like, I've had a man crush on this guy for years now, and like, he's pure charisma, and people are just now realizing, like, oh my God, like, forget Timothée Chalamet. I want the daddy. I want.
That's right. Hardcore DILF energy there.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I loved the casting here. I mean, I was just so quickly brought into each one of the characters, like immediately suspended disbelief and was like, yep, Jason Momoa is now Duncan Idaho. Like, it just, I found it very easy to sink into the characters as portrayed by the cast. I did really love the casting of Sharon Duncan Brewster as Kynes. And I thought that was a great choice, I think, to not only to bring more women into the cast, but to take that character of Kynes and make them more interesting, even more so, than the book, and add like a different, more updated layer. Minor quibble that Lady Jessica does not look like she is old enough to have a son who appears to be in his 20s. But like, okay, she's from a water planet. She's a noble woman. She probably has really good skincare routine. So like,
Yeah. Okay. I just looked at her age just out of curiosity. We were talking about Rebecca Ferguson, who I think did a fantastic job, by the way. She is 38. So yeah, she is pretty young, I guess, to have depending on when she had him, I guess. You could just maybe buy it.
I was reading that Timothée Chalamet is only 12 years younger.
Oh, than her?
Yes.
Well, that would explain.
Yeah, that's not going to look right.
My impression.
But by the way, she was a favorite from the Dr. Sleep coverage we did, because she was Rose the Hat.
Yeah.
In that movie, so, she was great in that. So I was happy to see her return. A bunch of these actors we've got to touch on in different projects over the years. Always cool. Shout out to Stellan Skarsgård as the Baron, as very frightening. I think very novel accurate, and he doesn't have a lot of screen time, but when he's on screen, you just are watching him like for everything he does.
Yeah, it's magnetic.
Absolutely.
The Apocalypse Now reference when he's like coming out of the black and it's completely covering his face, the pool of black.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, I didn't catch that as a reference, but I like that.
Yeah, now that you're mentioning it, I totally see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention about the casting is they deliberately, I think, leaned away from Herbert's analog of the Fremen as being coded Middle Eastern. And like the books feel like the Fremen are drawing pretty heavily on the Middle East and on Islamic culture. And I think with this film, they deliberately steered away from that. I have seen some criticism of the fact that by leaning away from that, it kind of erases the very obvious influences that Herbert had in the novel, to the extent that there aren't any actors of Middle Eastern descent in the main cast.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really interesting sort of ethical question that I do see get raised a lot. I think rightfully so. I think people have also noted that there wasn't a lot of Muslim or Middle Eastern people behind the cameras either, or on the set, period. So you don't have the same excuse for that, right? Like, you could have these people on camera and like help bring more authenticity to what you're showing.
I would rather see something more novel accurate, and just the idea of taking out a section of people that are not represented well in film, and like I just feel it feels weird to me that would be the case. Like, why not keep that representation, and it would be even more accurate to the novel? It does feel like a weird decision.
Yeah.
It is kind of an interesting, like, I like the idea of making the Fremen less homogenous, right? Like, there is kind of a variety of people who seem to make them up. But yeah, you still probably should have had a few prominent Middle Eastern actors, I would assume would have been doable.
Yeah, it does feel like a bit of a miss because of how much Herbert's influence and his inspiration came from that part of the world and from that cultural heritage, that it would have been nice to see that.
We talked at some point in the coverage about how clearly Herbert was influenced by Lawrence of Arabia.
Right.
And that's the key, I think, touchstone for this, and to not have that represented in something that's clearly almost a like a sci-fi reference of Lawrence of Arabia in ways is definitely weird. And Lawrence of Arabia, definitely, there are shots in this film that I'm like, Denis Villeneuve is referencing Lawrence of Arabia here. There's like expansive shots that Fonda was mentioning earlier, and some of that.
It also kind of felt to me like this world could exist in the same world as our heptapods from Arrival, because like the ships and stuff had like kind of a similar tech. I don't know. Like I don't think he was doing that on purpose. Maybe that's just the way he likes to design spacecraft. But the sort of the immensity, like you were talking about, the way they move in almost an otherworldly fashion, and they hover, and the way they twist and turn in the air, and I don't know, there's just so many cool shots looking up at these spacecraft coming out of the sky, and how sort of awe-inspiring that can be. And that gave me very strong vibes from Arrival, because it definitely felt the same way in that movie.
I'm sure that Denis is happy to hear that, and not that you felt strong Star Wars vibes, because the elephant in the room is that, like, Star Wars was inspired by Dune in some ways. And there, that was something that they had to address in the production design process, is like, how do we make this not look like Star Wars? Because it's a, space opera. We got to do something different. And I think they achieved that well. Like, it feels entirely its own thing. This is so cinematic. The way that the Bene Gesserit is, like, not only represented as an audio form and like the sounds that we're getting, but like visually, there's like a look to the Bene Gesserit power as well. And like a lot of that stuff is just so creative.
Yeah, the world building is really something to behold, because I feel like I've been waiting for decades to see some of the things that I saw in this film. Like the shield fighting was just so cool. And,
and the sound.
Yes. Yeah. And, the ornithopters.
Look like dragonflies.
Right. The dragonfly look to them. They're more insectoid than I thought they would be, but they were cool. And, the spice harvesters, the still suits, like all these things, I felt like, we've been waiting for years to see them represented, and finally got them.
Yeah, the shields in particular, I think the decision to have the blue-red dynamic for like when you're actually penetrating versus when you're not, it's such a simple decision to make, but it's so easy to spot and track and understand. And then that little world-building element, I was noticing... It bleeds over into other things. So like when, well, this is a spoiler. All right, I'm going to touch back in on this once we get to the spoiler section, which it sounds like we are geared up and ready to go.
We're close to, yeah. We're close. You mentioned the ornithopters, and Denis is known for shooting almost everything in camera. He doesn't want 3D environments. He doesn't want to like have the film be this like computer created.
It's not shot like The Mandalorian, you're saying? Like on a
that's
stage like
even
that?
That's volumetric. The volumetric is more practical than something like something entirely created in a computer, 3D space where they manipulate everything. There was never anything shot through a lens. So just to talk about that a little bit, he shoots what are called plates, which if you've ever done any VFX stuff, it's the frame that where you're going to have actors or ornithopters, whatever's coming through, without that in it, so that you can reference it later for VFX. So he shoots his plates, and then he has references for the ornithopters. They use helicopters. So they take out the helicopters and they put in ornithopters. So just to like take it down to that level of filmmaking and say like, no, I want to shoot it because I feel like it gives it that more grounded look.
Yeah, you have to be someone like Denis Villeneuve to go to somebody, the money people, and be like, we're going to need 3 helicopters flying into this shot, and then I'm going to take them out, and it's just for reference.
I can't tell you the number of times that I heard him say, like, I'm not worried about the budget. I wasn't worried about the budget and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's because he's a master filmmaker. He's in that class of, like, Nolan and like, Scorsese and, like, some of these people who can just do anything they want. And they figure it out eventually in the budget department. They'll find a way to make it
must be
work.
nice. Like, I wish more filmmakers got that
Agreed.
freedom, because
definitely.
It's pretty rare.
One of the things about the VFX shots is lighting. Denis mentioned how important lighting those scenes is in order to make the VFX look, perfect. Things like the sandworms that we're going to talk about at some point. it has to be shot perfectly with the perfect lighting. And he said that his year working with Roger Deakins on Blade Runner 2049 really like informed a lot of that and helped him like achieve that for this film. So, you know, we have Roger Deakins to thank to sort of train up Denis Villeneuve in like VFX environments like that.
You said he's not the cinematographer for this movie. But
no.
it does feel like visually similar in a lot of ways. So I'm interested if what's the chicken and egg there, you know, like where is Villeneuve like thinking about all the stuff that Roger Deakins brought to the table and going, I want to use that in my other movies, or what?
Yeah, I don't want to take anything away from Greg Fraser, who is the cinematographer for this movie.
Yeah.
Just because, like, you know, I'm sure he's a great artist, and I'm sure Denis Villeneuve is also like he's a very singular vision. So like I'm sure his director of photographies or cinematographers are executing that as he would like it. Greg Fraser was most known for Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, and Zero Dark 30.
Okay, cool.
Oh, I can see that now.
All right, one more story, and then we'll get into our spoiler plot talk.
Okay.
This is such a fun story. Sound designer Mark Mangini reached out to someone named Danny Connor Wild. I don't know if you're familiar, but she had a video go viral like 2 years ago of baby red squirrels eating. And she's a wildlife photographer, and she decided to get close, and because she felt like the photo represented well what she wanted to, but she also wanted the audio of the little squeaking that they made. And so she got close, recorded that audio, and then put it online, and it went like insanely viral, like 15 million views in a day or something like that. And Mark Mangini, the sound designer for Dune, reached out and said, hey, I'd love to use that sound for a movie. And she was like, what movie? And he was like, look at my IMDb, and I think you'll probably be able to figure it out. And it happened to be Dune. And what he was reaching out for was the perfect sound that he was looking for a long time to represent Muad'Dib in the film.
It's the desert mouse. If you're not familiar,
The little desert mouse.
Yeah, it's been on Twitter all over. People love it.
So it was really cool. She reached out to him right before, this was like, you know, a few days ago, and she was going to go see the film, and she got to interview him and talk to him a little bit about it. And he talked about the process of going through a film and like seeing what sounds need to be created, and the way that they manipulate audio in the same way that they manipulated this red squirrel audio to make it Muad'Dib for Dune. And I just thought it was really cool to think about like creating sounds for ornithopters and worms and shields, all of that stuff. He said that they start from somewhere acoustic and organic, like somewhere practical, and then manipulate from there and layer on other sounds. He mentioned one of his first films was Gremlins, and he used his cat for Gizmo's noises that Gizmo would make.
How about that?
Okay, well, I think it's time to jump into the plot here. Duke Leto I of House Atreides, ruler of the ocean planet Caladan, is assigned by Padishah Emperor to replace House Harkonnen as fief ruler of Arrakis. Arrakis is a harsh desert planet and the only source of spice, a priceless substance that extends human vitality and is critical for interstellar travel. In reality, the Emperor intends to have House Harkonnen stage a coup to retake the planet, eradicating House Atreides, whose influence threatens the Emperor's control. Leto is apprehensive, but sees potential to ally with Arrakis' native population, the Fremen, as the first step towards increasing the Atreides' standing in the Landsgrad. Leto's concubine, Lady Jessica, is an acolyte of the Bene Gesserit, an exclusive sisterhood wielding advanced physical and mental abilities. Although Jessica was instructed by the Bene Gesserit to bear a daughter whose son would become the powerful Kwisatz Haderach, out of a love for Leto, she bore a son, Paul. Throughout his life, Paul is trained by Leto's aides, Duncan Idaho, Gurney Halleck, and the Mentat, Thurfer Hawat, while Jessica trains Paul in Bene Gesserit disciplines. Paul confides in Jessica and Duncan that he is troubled by visions of the future. Because of these visions, the Reverend Mother, Gaius Helen Mohaim, comes to Caladan and subjects Paul to the Gom Jabbar, a deadly test to assess a subject's impulse control, which he passes. Okay, so let's start with that Gom Jabbar scene. It's exciting. I think that this is like exactly what I was expecting. And the level of detail throughout these scenes is just like, we've talked about it already, but masterful. I love the Bene Gesserit's costuming with the...
Costuming all around, right?
Yes.
I think I tweeted something about how I wanted to know where House Atreides gets their outerwear. Because I want like the coats that they're wearing on Caladan. It's so cool.
Where's their autumn catalog?
Yeah, right. Yeah, so the veil over the Bene Gesserit, I thought that was so powerful. And then that scene, Charlotte Rampling, is so intimidating in that scene.
Yeah.
It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And I just love the back and forth. You see like the innocence of Paul sort of leave as he realizes how intimidating this figure is, and how his mom has kind of brought him into this room for a test that could potentially kill him. And then there's the moment where she seems like she almost like can see that Paul is potentially more than meets the eye, and she sort of is like, okay, the test is over now. I just thought that scene was like a great representation of what's in the book.
Yeah, early on in the film, I really liked seeing some of the other planets. So I think, obviously Arrakis is so well developed, but also getting to see Caladan and the Harkonnen homeworld of Gedi Prime.
That was so wild.
Those were also just amazing world building pieces as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think we even see the prison planet, which I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, but although I think they call it the Sardaukar Emperor's army planet or something. They don't call it a prison planet in the movie, but it's a prison planet in the book. But then there are prisoners, so I was like, I think that it's still a prison planet. They just didn't call it that, and it immediately sets these houses up as being, quite obviously different from one another, as the Harkonnens are beastly and pale and bald and strange and, seem to love BDSM wear and things like that.
Well, apparently I remember reading somewhere that the idea behind the design of the Harkonnen homeworld was that they had destroyed the ecology of their planet. So they lived in a completely artificial environment. Maybe they're surrounded by plastic, and they don't get any sunlight, and so that's why they're so pale. And
that makes sense. Yeah, totally. And again, I'm sure he was able to draw on stuff from later novels, which I haven't read, but I'm sure that some of this stuff is probably in those, I would assume.
I was reading that Denis was saying the hardest part to edit of the film was actually the beginning, because he, of course, wanted it to be satisfying to hardcore fans, but also needed it to be presented in a clear way that would sort of line up all of these dominoes they need to set up in order and have it be satisfying and also clear. Seems like such a difficult task to show all these different worlds and get everybody onto Arrakis is like a tall task.
Yeah, I definitely felt like the way he did it was he focused really closely on Paul and Jessica. And this is really their film. And that comes through really strongly, because I felt even more connected to Paul as a character in the film than I did in the books.
I agree.
Because Paul was fine in the book, but he never really, I never really felt that attached to him when I was reading the novel in the same way that I did in the film. The flip side to that, though, is that some of the secondary characters don't get as much emphasis. So, for example, the Mentats, like Thufir Hawat and
Pytar,
the Harkonnen, Peter de Vries. They seem to have very minor roles in comparison to the book, where, for example, in the book, the whole intrigue around the presence of the traitor, with Thufir Hawat being certain that there is a traitor in the Atreides household, and he has this conversation with Jessica, and in fact the books are set up in a way that we know that there is a traitor. We know that Leto is going to be betrayed, and we find out pretty early on that it is Yui, and then the suspense is really like, how does that happen? While as in the film, that is pulled back on, and so the betrayal, I know we're moving past the Gom Jabbar scene a little bit now, but like that all comes on much more suddenly, and some of the secondary characters I think get pushed aside more in favor of focusing on Paul and Jessica.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And Dr. Yui is a character who is much less... we get a little bit of why he betrayed him, but we just know a lot less about him in the movie. But before we get away from the very beginning, I do want to just circle back to the movie actually starts with... I think it's pronounced Chani in the movie, but I think it's Chaney in the audiobook. So I have two different pronunciations in my mind. I don't know what's accurate anymore. But yeah, Chaney, that's what I called her in the previous episodes. She talks at the beginning and is like clearly kind of a part of the Fremen fighting force. And I was glad she did, because otherwise she kind of disappears from the movie for a really long time.
Right.
Well, that's one of the main things I've heard too, is like a lot of people who love Zendaya
Yeah.
went to see this film and
Where's
were
Zendaya?
like, well, she was in 7 minutes, and the trailers would not have you believe that.
Yeah, completely agree. I can see that, and I'm glad they had her do that, at least, just to give her something to do.
I hope that the implication is that like she'll have more to do in the next film, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the you mentioned before that you liked the way they handled the Bene Gesserit voice, and I think they just call it the voice. And I agree. It's like, that's such a hard thing to pull off in a movie and have it be believable and like as scary as it would be. And yet the way they layer the voices, it isn't like what I would have imagined it sounds like, yet it's so good. It's like, it's very weird. It sounds like multiple people talking at the same time. And then the way that I'm not sure exactly if this is true or not, but I think they would have people move in such a way, like very quickly or something. It was something unsettling about the way they would comply with the voice, which also showed it being unnatural. And there was just a couple of little tricks here or there that really sold this on being an incredible power that would be very frightening if you met somebody who had this ability.
I heard Denis speak about how they represented that, and he wanted it to seem like the characters fell into like a mini coma or something. Like they almost, like the way that the camera draws away from them, they fall out of focus. And then like it's so quick, everything's cut very quick.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, the quick cuts. Yeah,
it works very well. And another thing that Denis Villeneuve mentioned in an interview, he really wanted to focus on how powerful women are in this story, and that was part of the idea with Kynes being a woman in this film, and Jessica being important, and Chani, and basically all three of these women are shaping what's going to happen to Paul. And specifically everything going on with the Bene Gesserit, he, like, if you hear the score, the sort of voices are all female. There is like an emphasis on a lot of that stuff. And I like that, and I'm like, I don't know. Part of me is like, there's still not a ton of female representation in the film, and like it doesn't necessarily feel like enough. But I do love that, like the idea of the story being like driven through this sort of female power, and specifically to get to the voice that you're talking about. It's like the idea was to have like all of the ancient Bene Gesserit speaking at once, and like so layering many different women's voices on top of Jessica's or Paul's or whoever's speaking. I thought it was so effective. Like I said, that's like, I was getting chills in the theater with some of those moments too. Like the way it was so intense. It was just like the way that it would come on, and it was like so sharp. Okay, so this next section. Later, Mohiam instructs House Patriarch Baron Vladimir Harkonnen to spare Paul and Jessica during his coup, which he duplicitously agrees to. House Atreides arrives at Arrakeen, the stronghold of Arrakis, formerly held by House Harkonnen, where Idaho and an advance party have been learning about the world and the Fremen. Leto negotiates with the Fremen's chieftain Stilgar and meets planetologist and imperial judge Dr. Leet Kynes. Kynes informs Leto, Paul, and Halleck of the dangers of spice harvesting, including giant sandworms who travel under the desert. During a flight, they spot a sandworm approaching an active harvester. Leto rescues its crew before the sandworm swallows it. Paul is exposed to the spice-laden air and experiences intense visions.
I can get into some of the stuff now I was kind of sitting on, but I think at some point we saw this weird spider being over on the Harkonnen homeworld. It has human hands, and it's crawling around.
Oh my god, horrifying.
Oh, right, that was freaky.
What was that? I don't know.
I don't know.
It's so interesting. Anyway, I just had to mention that because it's so weird, and it's like a little weird detail that I love.
Just as an aside, in the credits, it's called Human Spider Proxy.
Really? Okay.
Whatever that means.
Spider proxy. All right. Well, I mean, it has human hands, so I can see it. I do. Okay. So as much as I'm gushing about this movie, I wanted to point to things that I was like a little mixed on as much as possible.
You're not allowed to do that on this podcast.
Just to stay true. One of the things that for me that like when I first heard it was fine, but especially in the rewatch, I didn't love, and that was the line where Leto like says desert power. And then it gets repeated by people a few times. So they're like, desert power, see, desert power. And like, to me, it just, I don't know, it was a little like cringy almost, like a little bit too broad. It just like, it felt simplified in a way that I didn't like. Now, I'm open to other people disagreeing. I'm totally open to that. I just personally didn't love the line. Like, it was something about it rubbed me the wrong way.
I get that. Yeah, it does seem like it's not the strongest line, but to me it felt just like so colonial, like too like to where I was like, ew, like you're trying to take these people's desert power for your own.
Yeah,
and
it
like,
kind of undercuts his because he's a very human focused person and he cares about people.
Right.
And when you start talking about desert power, it almost sounds like very strategic.
Yeah, I like the character overall. I think he
Leto, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think he was very charismatic. Yeah. He was the leader that we wanted, and what eventually happens is pretty heartbreaking. But let's talk about the sand, like going on the flight and like seeing the sandworm and how that was all represented.
Yeah, the sandworm was not entirely what I expected. Like we can talk about the look of the sandworm, but it definitely had a sort of a prehistoric look to it. And when it first showed up, I immediately thought of the Sarlacc pit in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah,
that was definitely like with the the maw with the teeth going in. That was my first thought when I saw it.
Yeah, was the Sarlacc pit always a reference to Herbert's sandworms?
Probably.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of cross-fertilization. I mean, you can see, now between
with the Empire,
the two franchises, have both had so many movies and books that there's probably creative juices that are flowing both ways.
Tremors has to be a reference too, right? Tremors is like straight up like sandworms.
Yeah, like little sandworms.
Yeah.
I was surprised, actually, speaking of when Paul gets his first vision, how well the prophetic powers were represented in the film, because I wasn't sure how they were going to do that. And I could see it becoming confusing or just trippy and weird. But I think the fact that they kept bringing it back to his visions of Cheney helped ground it a little bit and prevent it from just seeming way too like superhuman and psychedelic. So the way that they show him having like these moments where he's exposed to the spice and he's having these prophetic powers, in a way, was almost easier to evoke in film with these visual just flashes that he's having than it even was in the novel.
Because when you read it, it almost gives it even more importance, because you're like, oh, the author's like telling me what to see right now. Whereas in film, you can sort of flash images by people and hopefully they'll miss some of it.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that also helps with one of the things you were talking about before with Paul Atreides, and why I agree. I connected a little bit more with the character. I think those visions sold me on him being a teenage boy a little bit more than I believed it in the novel, where he really behaves like an adult pretty much the whole time. But the idea of him fixating on this vision of this mysterious woman, I totally bought that for a teenage boy, so I got it. And it's almost more important than whatever other stuff's going on in the visions, it seems like. And then, he sells that with like subtle things later too. Like he has like a little smile here or there, or he looks like kind of awkward at times. And it's not very overt and obvious all the time, but I think there's a lot of subtlety with Chalamet's performance that sells a lot of that like immediate attraction he has to Cheney, but also his like just awkwardness around her. And also the fact that he's been having visions about her. I'm sure that's incredibly weird. So
yeah.
Which I know we're getting ahead of it. Anyway, so we were talking about the visions, but I did want to talk about this whole spice scene with the worm. One thing they left out that I remembered in the book was the identifying of Leto being the one who saw the worm, and I thought it was a really cool detail in the book where he finds out that whoever spots the worm, does the worm spotting or worm sign or whatever it is, gets a certain amount of money. And then he gives all of his money that he would get for having spotted to the workers on the spice harvester. And I really like that detail in the book. I understand it's probably cut for time. They kind of do a little nod at it, but overall, I think that scene works really well, even despite certain things that were just really cool in the book, not making it onto the screen. But yeah, I still liked it. And as our first look at spice, really, right? Like, I guess we've kind of seen it before, but where we see this kind of red dust that I assume smells just like cinnamon, and getting everybody super high, especially Paul. It seems like he's like tripping out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That scene had so much tension. Like I love that scene. I thought that was like that scene propelled me through any of the stuff that I felt like was maybe harming the pacing. Scenes like this,
I didn't have any problems with the pacing until later. To me, the whole start of this movie is just fantastically paced.
Yeah. To be honest with you, like I up until the end of the film, I was so preoccupied with, and of course I was enjoying the film and like just like taking it all in, but I was also thinking like, okay, how much more are we going to get? Like, I hope we get more. I hope we get this. I hope we get that. And it honestly flew by.
Yeah.
A 2.5 hour movie that felt like it was like an hour and a half.
I really had the same reaction where I feel like it was shorter than it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because, I'd read the entire novel and I knew that the entire novel could not be shown in this first film. But I do think, considering everything that he covered and how faithful he was to the book, that the pacing was very well done.
So Paul walking off this ornithopter like to go save people and then being hit by the spice, and the way that scene is one that will stick with me forever because of the ways that like it was so beautiful. Like it was like this close up of him and like the spice flying by his face, and then we were starting to get flashes of visions, and then it goes in. I think this is when we go into the full on vision of him like later, right, with he and Chaney like up in the looking down at the warriors like on Caladan or whatever. That would be like a future vision. That scene was just like really affecting to me, and then like of course Gurney like runs out and like brings him, and they like run towards the ornithopter and like make it like last second.
Yeah.
And they looking down at the carnage of the worm just like swallowing it. It was just like my jaw was just open this entire scene.
Well, I particularly love the effect that the worm has on the sand while it's approaching, where it becomes almost like quicksand. You can't move in it. That's terrifying, right? Like the idea that you would get stuck in it. Of course, we even see that pay dividends later in the film, but so cool that like vibration making it almost like water, and we also get the idea that that's how they're able to travel through sand like they do.
After a failed attack on Paul's life by a Harkonnen agent, Leto places his soldiers on high alert. Suk Dr. Wellington Yue disables Arakine's protective shields and allows the Harkonnen army and disguised Sardaukar troops to overwhelm the Atreides forces. Yue incapacitates Leto and tells him he made a deal to deliver him to the Baron in exchange for his captured wife. Yue replaces one of Leto's teeth with a poison gas capsule and is killed after delivering the Duke. Leto releases the poison gas, killing members of the Baron's court and himself, but the Baron survives. Idaho escapes and steals an ornithopter, but Paul and Jessica are captured. Harkonnens take them to the desert to die of exposure, but they overpower them using the voice. Finding a survival kit left for them by Yue, they spend the night in a tent.
Wow, so many great scenes here. Yeah. Where do you want to start, Fonda?
This is really where I feel like it rose to the level of Shakespearean tragedy. Right, and just everything snowballing and coming crashing down, and Leto's death just really hit. I think that one of the reasons that Paul feels more real to me as a character in the film than he even necessarily did in the novels is the relationships that the film took to establish with the other characters. So like there's the scene back on Caladan when he's talking to his dad and they're walking and speaking about the future of House Atreides. There's the scenes where he runs and he hugs Duncan, right?
Yeah.
When Duncan comes
Anybody
back.
he's hugging, like, yeah.
Exactly.
He would hug everyone. I was like, oh man, they all love each other. Let's make sure nothing bad happens to anyone in this group.
I think Jason Momoa even did the meme where he was sneaking up behind the guy who plays Superman, whatever his name is, in The Witcher.
Oh, Henry Cavill.
Henry Cavill. There's a meme of him sneaking up behind him and he's like crouched down like he's going to give him a big hug. People meme this all the time. And he literally does the exact same crouch and then he does the hug to Paul. I don't know if he did that on purpose or if that's just how he does it. But
are you guys just in shock that like I know we had seen it on social media, but they shaved off Momoa's beard?
Interesting choice.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I honestly, it grew on me very quickly. I was into it. I was like, this guy is just a good looking man.
Yeah, I think I prefer the beard, but it definitely made him seem more buttoned up, I guess, to not have the big beard. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's why they did it, and also just to differentiate. Maybe they only wanted Leto to have like the only like sweet beard.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, you gotta be a duke before you can get a beard
You can
like
have
that.
a beard like that. Oh man. So speaking of, let's talk a little bit about Duncan Idaho, because he is, I think, a crowd favorite. I think everybody loves Duncan Idaho. He's like the best fighter, I think, that we see, at least that we actually get to see in combat. And him escaping during the assault is really cool. One of my favorite sequences. He steals doesn't steal it, I guess. He takes one of these ornithopters from some Harkonnens that he kills, and then he blasts a bunch of their ships, and then he has this exciting chase with like a laser following him through the city. Just very cool. I don't know. I really like his character, and I'm rooting for him. We see Dave Bautista show up as Raban, and he's like chopping off people's heads out of spite, I guess. It's like the only thing he does, but you just get a feel for what kind of guy this is.
They set up the fact that he just hates Atreides.
Yeah,
he
really
hates
does.
them all.
Right.
But another scene I wanted to jump back to is the scene with the hunter seeker that comes for Paul in his room, and so he's watching this, like, the encyclopedia sort of tell him about Arrakis, and that's when we first see a Moadim.
When he went onto that thing, that should have been Christopher Walken showing him how to do the sand walk.
Yeah, for sure. That would have been amazing. I didn't even think about that.
So this is the thing I was talking about earlier with the world building. And I wanted to ask you about this, Fonda, too. But it's also just something I noticed. The shields and the way they represented them carries over to the scene where the airfield's getting blown up. And you see these missiles coming down, blowing things up. And sometimes it would hit things and there wouldn't be a shield on it because they hadn't activated it yet, or the shield had been knocked out by a previous hit, and it would explode in a normal way. But then sometimes it would blow up like within the shield, and you would see the fire reach to the perimeter of the shield and get for a moment like held in before it burst through. It's such a small thing, but like such an attention to detail about like how the flames would behave while there's still a shield active. There were so many little details like that in this movie that they just nail, and I particularly love that one.
My favorite part of those bombs there is that, like, there were some that they were launching that were like falling slower, and we've talked about how the shields are like the faster hits don't hit them and the slower hits do. So these bombs were falling slower, and they would hit the shields and slowly penetrate.
Yeah, those were so cool. I mean, this is an example in my mind of using your world building in order to fulfill a particular aesthetic that you're looking for. Like, why are the shields so particularly cool? Well, in my mind, the reason why the shields add to the world is now you have like a science fiction setting in which you have to do a heck ton of knife fighting, right? Like that's, I mean, how do you get past the fact that like you've got all this advanced tech and you've got all these spaceships, but really what you also want is like Sardaukar soldiers fighting, the Atreides security guards in like hand-to-hand combat with like machetes, right? So like the shields are the way to kind of create that as a world-building necessity. And if you actually think about it, you're like, well, it kind of doesn't really make a ton of sense, because it would be really what would happen is someone would find a way to like, I don't know, disable these shields, or like a more high-tech way to penetrate the shields. But no, now we're all knife fighters now.
Yeah.
And so you get like a lot of just cool hand-to-hand combat as a result of like this one world building detail.
Since we're talking about this, I read that fight coordinator Roger Yuan based the fighting of House Atreides on Filipino martial arts.
Oh, wow.
To make House Harkonnen seem barbaric, he based their fighting style on ancient Mongolian fighting styles. So yeah, I just thought that was cool that he was taking those influences, and apparently the Sardaukar in this adaptation are inspired by two different warrior cultures: the samurai of feudal Japan, and I'm going to butcher this, but it's the Ulfhednar guard of the Norwegian king Harald Fairhair. The samurai influence being the Sardaukar's fighting style, and that they are an elite military caste, while the Ulfhednar influence is the Sardaukar as a fanatical warrior cult practicing blood sacrificing and blood anointment before battle.
Oh, that was supposed to be a blood sacrifice? Interesting.
I think so,
okay. Yeah. Also, they have like that throat singing. It's a big part of theirs. Which we want to talk about the music a little bit. Atreides, somebody busts out a bagpipe and starts walking out, and you're like, oh, that's an interesting choice. But as soon as the actual score comes in to accompany that bagpipe, I was like, I'm sold. This is amazing. It's so
good. It's incredible. So we're talking about score for a second. Hans Zimmer apparently was creating instruments for this film because he wanted a sound like no other. He was creating instruments and having people like expert musicians play their instruments incorrectly and in different ways in some of the time. So like they were looking for an entirely new soundscape for this film, and apparently Hans Zimmer was just as passionate about Dune as Denis Villeneuve was. So like they were just collaborating so much together. And it's funny because like there are these lines drawn in production where like, this is my line, don't cross it. If this is your job, you stay over there, I'll stay over here with my job. And so sound designing and scoring a film, composing are two entirely different things. So sound design is responsible for everything besides the music. And apparently there had to be conversations between sound design and Hans Zimmer, the composer, because he was teetering on basically sound design and some of the ways he was using the instruments to create the soundscape for this movie. And apparently they were saying like it was great, like, you know, collaborative conversations back and forth and all this stuff. But I just think it's funny that a composer is almost stepping into the realm of sound design for this film.
The number of iconic scores that the man has come up with is just innumerable, and it's amazing. So and this is just another one that is absolutely incredible. There was a scene in this section that I do want to talk about. It's the introduction of Stilgar. He comes in, Javier Bardem, who we covered recently on No Country for Old Men, where he was fantastic. And he comes in as Stilgar, immediately just captivating the way he ignores all protocol, doing his own thing. I love the idea of like have a religious knife that you carry with you at all times, because then people won't take it from you. Apparently you're just like, oh, it's part of my culture, it's religiously important. They're like, oh, okay. And then you could just kill people if you want to. But yeah, he comes in and then he spits, and like I thought that was such a great moment where
I'm really glad they kept that in there.
Josh Brolin as what's his name, Gurney
Halleck
was just ready to throw down with him. It's so funny. And then the way Momoa sells that, we appreciate that gesture, and he like looks at that.
And then he spits.
And then they all spit. It was very funny. And I don't know, like I like to think that Stilgar's just completely messing with them, because he has to know that they don't understand what this means, but he's like, I'm gonna come in and just spit on the table right in front of them, and just see how they react. It's like all a test, I feel like, for the character. And Stilgar was one of my favorites in the book, so I was really happy to see him here, and I'm excited to get more of him in the next movie, I hope.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the scene in the tent with Paul and Jessica after they go down. And this was one of the times in the film where I felt like we got more of the humanity of Paul, more so than in the books. Like there's that moment where he's just overwhelmed with spice and he's having these visions, he's sweating, and Jessica tries to comfort him, and he just like, he flinches from her and he explodes and is like, you Bene Gesserit made me a freak. Like there was that moment made him really seem like this scared teenager who didn't know what was going on and just found out that his dad was dead and had been betrayed by someone in the household. Like that moment, I think, was a great one in which Timothée Chalamet really sold Paul.
Yeah, and he says, "You did this to me," and it was like you could tell it was just a dagger. And I wanted to shout out Rebecca Ferguson again, because I think she does a lot of work with Jessica that is really good, portraying this like inner struggle. Even going back to that Gom Jabbar scene when she's standing outside and she's clearly reliving the most painful experience she's ever had, and she knows her son's going through it at the same time. So she has this moment where she like looks at her hand and she's like clutching her stomach and like almost doubled over with pain and like having a panic attack, and all that stuff is all nonverbal. And like you said, there's no voiceover telling us her thoughts, which most people, like we've talked about it many times, when you're adapting novels, filmmakers love to do voiceover because you can get those lines in there and you can get those exact phrases. But this is another way you can do it. It's just very difficult, and it takes some fantastic acting, and I think they were able to achieve it here. And then the scene you were talking about specifically in the tent, I also love how the tent itself was like a still suit, and it like collected their moisture and fed it back to them, and like all of that stuff working together, and the way the vibration of he has a little device that does a vibration that's similar to how the worms do the vibration to get through the sand. Again, the world building is just so good.
So you mentioned the VO again. One of my favorite quotes that I read that Denis has said about anything in the film is that if he wanted the inner monologue, he wanted the inner thoughts of the characters, but he didn't want to use VO, and he said, quote, "I didn't want to do VO, so I got Hans Zimmer to do the VO."
Perfect. Oh, so there's another part in this section. Man, it's just jam-packed with stuff that actually contains my favorite sequence and perhaps favorite shot of the entire movie. And that is when Leto has been taken in front of the Baron, and he's in the dinner dining table area, whatever you would call that room, dining room. And he's like laid back, sort of naked, and is sprawling in this chair, and the Baron's just like chowing down. But that's not the shot. That shot's cool. But the shot is when Yui is like telling the Baron what the agreement was, and the Baron, first off, he activates these little things on his neck, which I don't know if you noticed this, but a really cool little detail is they start to glow red right before he hovers.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So they start glowing red, and then we see this shot where he's kind of out of focus, and he lifts up out of his seat, and he starts hovering along the table coming at you. That is my favorite shot in the whole movie. So creepy, and the way it's like staged, and seeing his feet kind of dangle, and he even like touches the table at one point. It just looks so good, and then he comes down, and he's so intimidating when now all of a sudden he's in your face. I love it, and it's probably my favorite, Baron scene from the whole thing, because he's so scary in this, and he's confronting Leto, and then the gas sequence I thought was captured really, really well. It was really scary, and like everybody's dying immediately, and I thought they sold the idea that his shield and then his hover tech, and there's just enough there to buy that he's able to live when everyone else dies. Yeah.
That robe was perfect. Anytime he was moving around, he was so much larger than life. Like in every scene he was in that robe just dangling, it just looks like he's that size. Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought up that horrifying scene where he's up in that'll give me nightmares forever, where he's like up on the ceiling and he's like,
yeah, and like the little guys in their suits like all take like 2 steps away when they spot him, which I thought was really funny.
It's scary. So apparently 8 hours to get Stellan Skarsgård into the Baron look. Okay. 8 hours.
Yeah.
And then he has to film for 10 to 12 hours a day.
Oh,
it's
gosh.
Just like unbelievable.
Oh my gosh, was he sleeping while they put it on, like we covered in Murder on the Orient Express?
Maybe, yeah. There are actors are like, they're in green rooms a lot and stuff, but I mean, he's on set and like ready for production, ready for shooting for a long time, and that's no joke. 8 hours of sitting in a chair while people put stuff on you is wild.
It makes me claustrophobic just thinking about it.
It worked really well for me though too. I heard Denis Villeneuve talking about like how he kept trying to get him into scenes where he would not have clothes on, so he like added, because he felt like he looked so intimidating when you could see his back, and he's so large. And he added the scene where Raban comes and like he's like he doesn't have a shirt on. He's like,
it's like the first scene we
like,
see him actually, I think.
Yeah. So he like added the fact that he would have like no clothes on for that and stuff, because he just felt like it was so intimidating, just a big presence. And Stellan Skarsgård said that he wouldn't have done, if they wanted to do it CG, he wouldn't have done it, but he wanted the practical. And then Denis made the joke of like, well, he asked for it, like he wanted it to be practical, so he couldn't complain 8 hours in the chair every day. Okay, so here we go for the next section. The Baron hands over command of Arrakis to his brutish nephew Raban and orders him to sell spice reserves and restart spice production to remunerate the cost of the coup. Paul and Jessica are found by Idaho and Kynes and head to an old research station, but are quickly tracked down by Sardaukar. Duncan and various Fremen sacrifice themselves to allow Jessica, Paul, and Kynes to escape the facility. Kynes, cornered by Sardaukar troops, lures a sandworm, which devours them along with her. Paul and Jessica reach the deep desert and meet the Fremen, among them Stilgar and Cheney, the girl in Paul's visions. Fremen member Jameis protests their admission and is killed by Paul in a ritual duel to the death. Against Jessica's wishes, Paul joins the Fremen to bring peace to Arrakis.
I felt like, this last chunk, for one thing, Kynes' death hit harder for me in the film. And I think they did a good job making it more dramatic, because if I recall in the book, Kynes wanders into, he is basically dies slowly with like vision or like his father's voice in his head, and so it's kind of this drawn out. I mean,
he does explode, I think, at the end, because there's like a pocket of gas or something.
It's like a spice buildup
Yeah.
or whatever.
Right. Yeah. But in the film, Kynes helping Paul and Jessica to escape, and then luring the sandworm, and the sandworm coming in and devouring Kynes and the Sardaukar.
Such a badass moment when she's like pounding the
really
sand
badass,
at them. Yeah.
Yeah.
She pulls I love that she pulls the hooks out too. Like, it was so sudden. She pulls the hooks out and I was like, is she going to get away in this version of the story?
Yeah. Right.
And then the knife in her back, and then she falls down and then, continues to lure the worm. I love that.
All this run on into the last part did feel, and I think, Luke, you brought this up a little bit too, felt like it was a little bit slowed, because they go first to that ecological station, and it seems like that's going to be a safe haven, but then the Sardaukar reach them there, and that's where Duncan makes his final stand. They have to escape again.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of two stages of escape, which I think made this section feel a little bit repetitious to me. But like, it didn't bother me too much because of the coolness of Duncan, Idaho, and then Kynes' death with the sandworm, and then the knife fight, and reaching Stilgar.
If I'm tracking this right, they escape in the ornithopter, Paul and Jessica, after that scene with Duncan, Idaho, which, by the way, it's badass how he's like not actually dead, and he pulls the sword out and he kills another 5 Sardaukar or whatever. Very cool. I love that whole sequence. And then I think they escape on the ornithopter and they get into the storm, and they're getting ready to like almost go down. And I think he has to turn off the ornithopter, and he kind of just like lets it take them. Basically, from that moment on is where I felt like the pacing got a little odd. And mostly it was kind of a victim of its own amazing climactic moment, because it felt like we had like an hour-long climax right before that. We'd had this incredible sequence with, just from the moment that the attack happens up into that moment, had just been like nonstop amazing action and just like Shakespearean drama, like you're saying, like characters are dying, like our beloved characters, and like all this stuff. And then it slows down. They crash, and we see them sort of traveling, and then the worm comes, and they have this moment where they're just looking at it, and it's cool, but it's very slow compared to what we had just seen, and it really, really slows down. And then finally we get their kind of smaller interaction with the smaller group of Fremen, and it ends up leading to a duel to the death, which is definitely exciting. But this whole sequence takes like another 45 minutes of the movie. And when you're just talking about how jam-packed the previous like 45 minutes had been leading up to that, it just kind of makes kind of a strange story. Instead of rising all the way to the end like you're used to, it kind of rises in the middle and then kind of falls off, and then you get a little bit at the end with this final duel. And I think part of that is because they're setting up part 2, right? Like, where there's going to be even more crazy stuff, which we won't spoil here. So I think that's what it is. I think it's just a remnant of setting up part 2, but there's a moment where it hits that part in the story, and I almost feel like, okay, I can kind of sit back now.
Honestly, and I don't know if I'm just biased, but it doesn't bother me. Like, I'm there for the long haul. Like, I don't mind the slow nature of the story. Specifically, I think because maybe I've already read the story and I know where we're heading with part 2 in ways. But I can definitely see people being turned off by that.
I'm of two minds, because on one hand it doesn't bother me, and I can tell that they're just setting up the next movie. But on the other hand, I'm like trying to view it as just a movie, like just as one movie.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought about this after I watched the film, where maybe the only potentially even better filmed version of this story would be like an HBO prestige series that got the Game of Thrones treatment.
I'd have to get $200 million budget.
Yeah, exactly. Where you had like even more time to develop like all the cast of characters, and like the ones that didn't get as much development in the film, like the Mentats, like Gurney Halleck, and then you could potentially have that whole cast of characters developed in all these kind of moments be like episode climaxes. So there's a version of Dune that I could definitely get on board with, which is like the even more fleshed out, like 10 episode season 1 of Dune. But then again, you would lose the visual impact of seeing like Villeneuve's just cinematic brilliance on like an IMAX screen.
Yeah,
so
I'm not ready to trade this thing. This thing is even, and I'm glad we're getting a part 2. If they had tried to cram the whole thing into one movie, I think it would have been a mistake. But yeah, I was with you. I mean, like, and that's something my wife said as soon as we walked out, or as soon as the movie ended. She was like, "I'm ready for another 3 hours. Like, let's go." Like,
like if it was, I would go back into the theater like after going to the bathroom.
Yeah, I was like, give me a short intermission, and then let's do part 2. At some point, they'll probably do a back-to-back showing like that. That would be fun.
I'm on board for that. Just spend the entire day in the theater.
Definitely.
And then we get this final fight, which I'm also glad we have you here to talk about, because it is a one-on-one duel, which if you haven't read Jade City, there are some duels in those books that are quite epic and fun and really well choreographed. And I thought this one was also well choreographed, and world building becomes important too, although more so in the shield-based combat, whereas here, for different reasons, I guess. But what was your take on this final duel? What did you think of it?
I enjoyed it. I thought that, it was the character development of Paul kind of brought to a head in that, this is the moment where he kills a man basically. And it's kind of like that, all right, you're not a boy anymore. Like he's lost his father. He's lost his home. He's had to kill somebody. He's made the decision. He goes against what Jessica says. She was just focused on basically saving him and getting him off planet. And he's like, no, like this is my path. So I think it was a good place to end the first movie, because it does bring it really down to Paul and his agency, both in that moment acting as champion and fighting that duel and making the decision to kind of follow his destiny, if you will. So I thought it was that it was good. I would have liked to see him, I get in the fight, struggle a bit more with the fact that he doesn't have a shield. And I thought that like it would be a closer fight, because there's that moment before he fights when he has that prophetic vision of himself being stabbed. Yeah. And I thought, okay, well, this is how he's going to die. And the way the fight is going to go is because he's had this vision, he's going to avoid this death, because having seen the future, he can change it. And he's fought all this time with a shield. So not being, moving the blade slowly as opposed to penetrate a shield, as opposed to fighting without it and having to avoid the blade. Yeah. I would have liked to see that brought out a little bit more and for him to struggle a little bit more. I felt like he defeated Jameis really easily. Yeah. Especially since Cheney was like, Jameis is a great fighter. He'll make it quick. Yeah. He'll die quickly. So I think they could have made that a little bit more suspenseful, a little bit more drawn out. But overall, I was glad to see it end on that kind of personal battle note. Yeah. And it carried us into the second movie pretty well, I think.
You've brought up several things I want to touch on here. So the visions is something that in my rewatch, I found a lot more to like dig into there, because I didn't really know what to make of him. Like he's told to like follow the friend. So he's having these visions of Jameis where it's like, follow the friend, and this guy's going to teach you about their ways. And then he has the vision of Jameis killing him, but then he hears a voice say, when you if you take a life, you take your own, or something to that effect. Mm-hmm. And I realized in my second watch that they're really setting up the idea that when he kills Jameis, he's killing Paul Atreides, like this kid version of himself, so that Muad'Dib or the
Kwisatz
Haderach.
Kwisatz Haderach can come to be.
The Quidditch hat trick, I think was what we said.
Quidditch hat trick.
can rise, right? I think that's even the line. So, it's kind of obvious in the rewatch. I was like, oh, okay, that's what they're going for. But I think when I first saw it, I wasn't quite following what they were going for in these visions, because it is a little kind of metaphorical when you thought maybe he's seeing an actual future, and instead he's seeing like a metaphor of him killing this guy and who then kills himself through the act of killing. So it works better in the second viewing, I think.
In envisioning what an adaptation of the first half of Dune would be, I felt like I was worried that Paul wouldn't have a clear arc.
Yeah.
And for me, that is the clear arc, right? Like, so he's now killed Paul Atreides to become the Messiah figure potentially in the future.
I wonder if everybody gets that on a first viewing, though. I don't know.
I picked up on it, but yeah, we've read the books. So
we've read the books and we're paying very close attention.
Yeah.
So another thing you mentioned there was, the method of fighting. It's very cool when it's described in the book that he's almost fighting with a handicap, a self-imposed handicap that he doesn't even realize, is that he's slowing his hits down at the last second because he's used to fighting people with his shield. And I don't know how if you could show that in some sort of slow motion or something where you could show that that's happening, because I definitely didn't get that in the movie, like that, or that was kind of omitted, and that I think was an important part of that duel. So I agree that that's also, like, I kind of missed that. But what I really liked, and I think this is also kind of a detail from the book where Stilgar says, is he toying with him? Because it becomes apparent that he's going to win pretty quickly. And he realizes that he doesn't understand that this is a fight to the death and he has to kill him. But that moment is a really good bit of storytelling and character work for Jameis, because Jameis starts screaming at him. And I was like, what is this emotion? And I think it's like him winning the fight but not killing him is like shameful. So I think it infuriates him. He's like, you've won, kill me. Like in that moment, he can't believe that
he's dishonoring him.
Yeah.
He's drawing it out in like a dishonorable way. And they don't really explain that, but it's there between the lines. And I love that stuff.
The one thing that I felt wasn't super clear to an audience member was how Paul, he was having these visions of a potential holy war or jihad, but was it clear that he didn't want that outcome to come to fruition? Because I think that was a big part of the book, and I don't know that it's going to be really easy to pick up on the fact that like he doesn't want that to be the case, because in the visions we get,
I think he says as much in the tent conversation, but the tent conversation had happened like an hour previously at that point.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. I mean, that is the disadvantage of film, right? Like, you can't, unlike a novel, you can't be like, well, here's what they're thinking as this is happening to them.
Let me remind you of this thing that was at the start of the book. Yeah. You don't have time. It ends in a very small place after being so big. And I think that is kind of an interesting decision, and I end up liking it. But yeah, it leaves so much unfinished business that I hope it just makes everybody want to see part 2 instead of get really frustrated, which I guess would be the worry, right?
Yeah.
What are your sort of final summing up thoughts of this movie, Fonda?
Oh gosh, I really went in with high expectations for this film, and really am astounded that those were met. I'm always a little bit worried when I go into a film with high expectations, but like, yeah, I think somebody who has read the books a lot, who's maybe just has all those visuals of the world, their mind can quibble on the edges, on the details of the execution. But I mean, we got a fucking fantastic Dune movie. Like, that's amazing, right? Like, after all these decades. So I came away really happy, having just like experienced this film. And I have a hard time. I know we're going to pick book or film. And I think they definitely both have their strengths. I think that I had really sort of the same feeling coming out of this film as I did coming out of like the first Lord of the Rings film, where there was this story that for so long people thought was unfilmable. Like, you're never going to be able to do it justice. And I think that this film did the book justice.
Yeah.
As I walked out of this film, I love that you mentioned Lord of the Rings there, Fonda, because like I had a similar thought process. And the way that I felt like the Lord of the Rings films really inspired me. I feel like this film, and maybe potentially the next one will, yet to be seen, but I think it will inspire a generation of filmmakers and storytellers. Like, this is the kind of story that I think is like, it's so massive and it's so meticulously crafted that I just felt, I walked out, I felt inspired. I was so proud of just like the medium. I was like proud that there were artists out there like this, like that were able to pull off this miracle. And like, I don't know, I was just like completely in awe, and love this film.
Yeah, I mean, I think you both said it really well. I completely agree. This does feel like a new generation's Lord of the Rings. It's very different. I mean, the Lord of the Rings is a very different animal in its tone and visuals and everything. But just in the fact that it is like a passion project for the filmmaker, it's going to be a multi-parter. It's just such high level filmmaking. I completely agree, and I was inspired just as a storyteller to just go keep working on my novel. So cool. Okay, so I think this is a good spot now. We, as Fonda alluded to earlier, we vote whether or not the book or film is better now. That's something we started doing, I think, since last time you were on. When we have a guest on, we like to have the guest go last. And just in case there is any ties that come up, you can be the tiebreaker.
All right.
Do you want to start, James?
Sure, I'll start. I mean, with what I just said, I was completely inspired walking out. Dune, the novel, I'm really trying to just talk about the first half of the novel and compare it to this first half of the story in the film here.
That's a good point. We should say, I think that's what we're going to, all of us are going to do. We're going to try and kind of compare like to like, so we're going to go with the first half. And we're going to reserve the right across the board to change our answers for part two. Because who knows how part two will go.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. So if part two comes around and we decide, overall we've changed, then we change. We'll see.
So overall, I'd heard for, decade plus how Dune was just like this remarkable piece of work that was like almost untouchable in the sci-fi community, and it inspired everything in the same way that something like Princess of Mars had like inspired so much going forward.
Inspired Dune.
Yeah. Right, which would go on to inspire Dune.
Right.
So I love the story. I engaged with it on such a deep level. But being the biased film guy, watching this film, like I said, was a religious experience. Seeing it on screen, massive IMAX with the great sound design, and like the way that the speakers are just like moving your body. It's so visceral. It's so like tactile. I don't know. I this entire experience, like going into the film, and of course the book heightened my excitement for this film. And I got to take the film in this case, because Denis Villeneuve just delivered something that, like, I was expecting something of a really high level, but it was just like, it exceeded my expectations across the board.
Yeah. I'm in a tough spot here. This is one of those projects, and this happens every now and then, where I don't pick before recording because I'm so on the fence that I'm like, I'm just going to have to decide in the moment. And that's kind of where I'm at. The novel is just like a legendary novel in science fiction, right? And I hadn't read it for whatever reason. I just missed it. And then whenever I talk to people about it, they're like, "Oh, you got to read that one." And I see why. Like, it is incredible, and worth its reputation, I think. It was written in 1965, but like you referenced earlier, Fonda, I think it really holds up in a lot of ways. There are some things that are a little creaky, a little dated, but it read really well for a book that's that old. I had a lot of fun covering it, but I'm trying to compare this to just the first half. I did really love the first half in the novel, but I have to remember that there's like a little bit of unfinished frustration I have around the movie, where I'm like, it didn't finish the story. And I have to remember that if I had only read the first half of the novel and then stopped, I'd feel the same way. So that ultimately has to be that has to be nil. That has to wash each other out. And we're left in a place where I am now the book guy on the show, and you're the movie guy, which makes me want to take the book just to like stay to our roles. But I think, to be true to myself, I got to go with the movie here. I think for all the reasons we just outlined, it just works, and it's such a great representation of this story. I've just really taken with it. I think I got to give the slight nod to the movie, but of course, with the caveat of, we're talking about adaptations here, like, the movie owes everything to the book, right? It wouldn't exist without the book. So of course, like, we're not trying to diss the book here at all. But forced to choose, I'm gonna go with the film. It's just a masterpiece. What do you think, Fonda?
It's also weird. It's a weird thing to have to do half of a book that we've read the whole thing of. So like, we're sorry if it's not working for you guys.
Oh, I feel like I was in a very similar mind space as you, Luke, where I'm a novelist, and Dune is, like I mentioned right at the beginning of the episode, such a influential and foundation text for me personally. Has had an impact on me as a writer, the way I approach my work, my craft, what I write about. So the book is special in a way that, and nothing will ever take that away, will never diminish it. And there are things about the book that I think can't be translated to film, no matter how fantastic a film it is. There is something about the book's sense of historic scale, like with the epigraphs that suggest that this is a mythos that has already happened, and you're looking back on it, and there's so many chewy ideas of ecology and religion and colonialism that I think are better suited to be elaborated on in prose form. For example, like the Bene Gesserit seeding the prophecy, and this idea of like organized religion interacting with this prophetic belief that has made the Fremen believe these things, but they're being manipulated. Like, you get a little bit of that in the movie, like when Jessica is talking to Paul when they first land on Arrakis, but you can't dive into that quite as much as you can in like a full-length novel. So there's just, Dune is a book that is just chock full of chewy ideas and an immense sense of scale. And yet the movie was more emotionally engaging to me and made me feel connected to the characters, even the ones that I didn't have that much attachment to in the books. So, it is so hard for me. But like I said, the book is foundational. Nothing's going to take that away. But if you ask me, am I going to spend my time rereading the book Dune, or am I going to rewatch the movie Dune? I'm going to rewatch the movie Dune. So I'm with both of you guys. I'm going to have to tip the hat over to the film this time.
Wow, unanimous. In these conversations where we pick a winner, like, I feel like the author, in some people's view, should always win. And like, I get it, right? Like, because all these ideas that are so great in the movie, it's coming from Frank Herbert, right? Like, and so if you want to like credit where credit's due, of course it would be the book. But we're just trying to weigh in on the medium, I guess.
The film always has the advantage of seeing how an audience reacted to the book and changing things based on that, and updating things as culture changes. And so, like,
it's a modern story in a way that the book can't.
It's been updated. Yeah, exactly.
It's an impossible task that we do for fun. So, like, that's where we have to leave it, unfortunately.
The way that I think of it too is like, I think the film is a co-creation between Herbert and Villeneuve, right? Like that.
He said as much,
and hundreds of other people.
Yeah, exactly. And so looking at that, it's not like, I'm picking one creator's vision over another. I feel like this is it's clearly a blend of like two genius visions.
He called the novel the Bible the entire time. If he had any questions, he went back to the novel. So like
Wow, that's awesome.
It's clear how he felt about the novel as well.
Okay, so we've gone super long, so thank you so much, Fonda. Thank you for spending so much time with us talking about Dune. We just love it.
Well, this was a pleasure. I mean, I just love this movie, and when I was heading to the theater, I'm like, I get to talk about this with you guys, and so I was looking forward to it the whole time.
That's awesome to hear. And, 2 years from now, I hope we're still going to be going. I want to cover part 2 when it comes out. And if you're available, let me know, because we'd love to have you back on and we can follow up with part 2.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
It's a date.
And also, if you get to have your show, which I'm knocking on wood and hoping it's going to happen. Jade Legacy coming out soon. So many exciting things. Anything else you want to share with our listeners before you go?
No, third book in the trilogy in the Greenbone Saga comes out soon, and
you have a Patreon. You want to tell
I
them
do.
about
I do have a Patreon. Yes, you can find me on Patreon, and there I post extras, Greenbone Saga extras, and monthly Q&A videos. And yeah, it's been fun to have that too.
If our listeners wanted to find you online, you want to share your social media accounts?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Fonda J. Lee. I'm on Instagram at fonda.lee, and my website, fondalee.com.
So cool. Well, thank you again, Fonda, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
So this was our Halloween episode. I know we didn't mention it earlier, but happy Halloween. Hopefully you're all having a good Halloween weekend coming up here. I'm excited for it. I'm going to get to go watch some like obscure Japanese horror film, I think is the plan. So I'm excited about that.
Sounds like a party to me.
Yeah, it should be cool. And speaking of Halloween, normally we cover a horror project at the end of October to sort of bring in the Halloween, but we didn't get to do that this year because of the way that this movie panned out and when it was released. But what we're going to do is cover a horror project right afterwards. And that worked out because over on Patreon, we put up a poll for our final quarterly listener choice project, and Carrie by Stephen King edged out Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by, I think, a single vote. So if you want to affect the outcome of the podcast, you can come on to Patreon and cast your votes in these things because, they're usually pretty tight. But because of that, I think it works out because we're going to get to do a horror project that I'm definitely excited about.
Fun fact, I was reading that Timothée Chalamet is working on a Wonka film right now. So he's like playing a young Wonka.
I think I heard that.
So it's funny how things like tend to connect, even though we're not covering it right now.
Maybe we should wait and cover, and because we will cover Willy Wonka at some point. Like I'm certain of it. So maybe that would be when to do it. Yeah. But yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I'm really excited this because like it's Stephen King's first novel. It's, this incredible film that I've never actually seen and I've just heard great things about. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to cover Brian De Palma on the podcast.
So super into that. But if you enjoyed this episode with Fonda Lee on as much as we did, let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on, or if you're on YouTube or Facebook or something like that, leave a comment, like it. And then share it. Tell a friend, especially if you know anybody who likes Jade City. Let them know. This is a lot of fun, and I just hope that people get to listen to this. Such a cool project, and I can't believe we're here at the end of it.
I can't either. At least we're looking forward to a couple of years from now. It feels a lot like It, where we had the It Part 2 on the way.
It really does. Yeah, that's a good point.
Connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at Ink2Film, and make sure to join our Council of Inklings. If you're in there, you can get a link to be a part of our Discord or just message us on social media anywhere. And our Discord's kind of been picking up recently, so it's been fun to connect with people more directly and intimately in that way.
Yeah, the Discord's definitely a lot of fun. We'd love to have you on there. Just let us know. It's open to non-patrons now, and we'll send you the link so you can get in there. Also, we wanted to thank Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music. If you were interested in getting any of the Greenbone Saga books by Fonda Lee, which I highly recommend, we have all of them on our bookshop, including the upcoming Jade Legacy, which you can pre-order. If you use our bookshop, which will be linked in the description of this episode, then we get a nice little, I don't know, like a % or something. It's cool. They give it a little kick from the site. So you get to help support the podcast and support Fonda. I mean, it's great. And you're not giving any money to Amazon, so even better.
Yeah, so here we are at the end of Dune. I'm looking forward to part 2, obviously, but we have Carrie next. Yeah. Stick with us. We'll have more projects on the way.
Yeah, this has been quite a journey. All we have left to do is, I think, do our sand walk off into the sunset. And until next time,
keep adapting.